with a video showing you how I made the tail for my Meteion cosplay. So first I will go over the list of materials and supplies you'll need. I'm sorry if I forget anything, but I should have a full list down in the description below as well. So for this you will need EVA foam. I used both 2mm and 4mm EVA foam. You also need a pretty sturdy or heavy duty wire. It doesn't have to be super heavy duty, but heavy duty enough where you could put it in the big feathers and it'll mostly keep its shape. Paints, I used airbrush paints to get this kind of gradient going on here, but you can also use acrylics or spray paint. A clear matte spray paint to seal everything with, and a spray paint primer as well. I used a gray matte spray paint primer for the base. Then you'll need oil paint to add in some shading, and a cloth or paper towel to wipe away excess oil paint. You'll also need a lot of hot glue and contact cement, some snaps to help attach it to other pieces of your costumes, and scrap fabric that matches the cape thing she has going on. As for tools, you'll need a sharp utility blade, a heat gun, a Dremel, and scissors. I believe that is it. And I believe that is everything. Again, if I missed anything, it will be down in the description below. One last thing before we get to the crafting, if you would like to skip all of the patterning yourself, I will have these patterns available in my store, Envy and Etsy. Both of those are linked down in the description box below, so feel free to check that out. The pattern for all of her pieces will be for sale, including for the tail. And let's get started. Sorry about that audio at the start of this video. My nicer mic for my camera had decided to break just before recording that. Anyways, to start off, I traced my pattern pieces on 2mm of high density EVA foam. I traced 2 pieces for each feather. I will note that later you will see yellow pieces of EVA foam. That is still 2mm EVA foam, but it was a low density, and I only used it because I had run out of my higher density EVA foam. I recommend only using high density EVA foam for these feathers, as it tends to shrink less when it's heated, and it's also more durable and sturdy. Then I cut out all of the pieces that I just traced onto my EVA foam using scissors, but a utility knife or whatever also works. You should now have all of your feather pieces cut out, and there should be 2 pieces for each feather. Be sure to keep things labeled so you know what piece each piece goes to, like how they pair together. I taped a piece of wire down the center of one feather piece per pair of feathers. So if you have a feather composed of 2 pieces, only one of those pieces needs a wire down the center. Since they'll be sandwiched together, you don't need to have a wire in both of them. And this is also only really needed for the largest feathers. Like the small little tiny feathers, they don't need a wire in them. I also just used Scotch tape to tape the wire down, since I only need it held in place temporarily because it'll be sandwiched and glued between layers in a moment. I used contact cement and coated the inside of each feather piece with it, one of those pieces being the one that has the wire. Let that get tacky and then sandwich 2 pieces together, sealing the wire between the 2. because the feather was so long, I glued it together in smaller sections, working my way from one end of the feather to the other. Next, you'll want to use a rotary tool to sand the edges of all of your feathers so that they're nice and smooth. You'll notice that I have cut out these notches in my feathers. I had cut those out before sanding, but after doing this, I definitely recommend sanding first and then cutting out those notches if you even want them. It's totally up to you. I can't find the video where I did cut out these notches, but all I did was cut thin, long triangles that are angled in the direction that feather hairs would be, and I just placed those around the edges at random. You can draw these out first to get an idea of where you want to place them. My only real notes are to be sure that you don't cut too many, because that can make it start looking a little weird, and future steps are going to add in a bit more notches as well, just not quite as thick. And you want to make sure that each triangle ends before or at what will be the center line of the feather. You should mark this line going down the center of the feather as well. I just roughly drew it on, but if you want, you could take like a ruler and be super exact. I wasn't. The next step takes a very long time and was actually quite straining on my wrist and arm. It could just be me, but I do recommend to make sure that you have enough time to work on this while being able to take breaks and even swap to working on other pieces for a day or so in between feathers, I guess, or in between a few feathers. You're going to want to take a sharp utility knife and cut tons and tons and tons of little lines on each side of each feather. The lines should be angled in the direction that feather hairs go, which is downwards and towards the tip of the feather. And they should start from the center line that you have marked and go all the way to the edge of the feather on like each edge or each side. Make sure that you are pressing hard enough to make a real indentation in the foam, but don't necessarily cut all the way through the foam, at least not every time. I used a bit of a varying pressure to create differences in the lines. Every now and then I would cut all the way through the foam, even a couple times in a row, to get some sections where the foam was broken up, and that would create smaller notches once it shrank a bit from a heat gun, which I'll talk more about in a later step. My lines weren't uniformed at all. It was just a bunch of quick strokes, which is probably why it was so tiring. And they were very randomly placed and placed very close together, even overlapping at some points. It's almost as if you're like trying to quickly draw hair on a drawing of a dog or something. also carefully made a bunch of cuts along the very edge of each feather because it stayed looking very smooth and non-hair-like, and because the feathers are 2 layers of 2mm EVA foam, it stood out enough where it looked very off being so smooth, especially in comparison with the hair texture that the rest of the feathers had. So I just quickly went in and did a bunch of small cuts along the edges the same way that I did the rest of the hair, just to give those edges some texture and more of a hair-like appearance. If your blade is sharp enough, it should easily slice through the foam without needing much pressure. If you're finding you need to put too much pressure and it's kind of difficult to hold the foam and put enough pressure to cut through these edges without it feeling like you're about to cut yourself, you're probably going to need a new blade or to sharpen your blade because it is not sharp enough. It should slice through like butter almost when you have a freshly sharpened or sharp blade. After you're done cutting all of the lines into the feathers, it's time to go over them with a heat gun. This will open up all of those lines and create deeper and wider grooves that will be more noticeable from a distance and look more hair-like, I guess. Be careful not to overheat the foam or heat it too much at once, as this can make your feathers shrink quite a bit and even melt the foam if you do overheat it. Use quick motions, and if you find any stubborn lines not wanting to open up, go over it again with your utility knife and then heat at least that section of the feather again after it's had a chance to cool. Next, I use some hot glue to sort of draw a line down the center of each feather on each side to create that little sort of stem-like detail that feathers have. After that, I primed each feather with wood glue. Use an old utility knife's blade or a toothpick to scrape excess glue out of the grooves. This is a little time consuming, but wood glue will try to fill in those grooves and you'll lose a lot of those details, so it's definitely something you kind of just need to do. After each feather was primed with around 3 layers of wood glue, I then spray painted each of them this kind of just regular bright-ish blue color. This was my base color. I used an airbrush to create a gradient where the feathers got lighter towards the center and stayed this normal bright blue color towards the end. Normal acrylic paints work as well, and you might even be able to get this effect if you know how to control spray paint well enough. To get this gradient on the feathers with my airbrush, it was a lot of going back and forth. I started at the center and then tried to carefully and slowly fade it out more as I got towards the edge. Sometimes I had to go back in with a blue that matched the spray paint I used just to soften up some harsh edges that I ended up getting here and there, just because I'm still a little bit new to airbrushing and I was figuring it out, but in the end I was happy with how it looked. do this for each feather on both sides, and when you're happy with how it looks, go ahead and top it off with a clear coat of matte spray paint to prep it for the next step and seal all of your work. After the feathers were sealed, I used black oil paint to shade them and really make all those grooves and details pop. I coated each feather entirely with a layer of oil paint, making sure to really press into those grooves. An older, stiffer paintbrush works great for this. Then I took a paper towel and wiped off all of the oil paint that I just painted on. Not too hard though, like I didn't press down too hard. I was only trying to wipe away anything laying on the upper layers of the feathers and not trying to press into the grooves or around the edges of that hot glue stem. When you do this, the oil paint should only be left behind in sunken areas like the grooves and around the hot glue stem, giving your feathers more depth and shading. I worked in sections, especially when it came to the big feathers, but there is no real need to rush when it comes to this, as oil paint can take a couple days to dry. Once it is dry though, and you're happy with how everything looks, go ahead and seal everything with one last coat of clear matte spray paint. Now it was time to start gluing this tail together, and I did lay out and use painter's tape to temporarily tape the tail together in order to figure out my feathers placements. That was so many T's, that took so many takes. I'm just going to leave it and move on. Anyways, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too fanned out, but it also wasn't like too straight up and down. I wanted the tail to have a little bit of a flare to it and kind of matched the photos that I was using of Meteion for reference, and I also wanted to make sure that the length was good. Then once I was happy with the placements of my feathers, I took a photo of that to use as my final reference when gluing it together. You can also make some light markings with chalk to help with the placement, or you can just leave everything taped together and slowly untape it and re-glue it as you go along. I decided to completely disassemble it though and go from there. I don't know why, that's just how I did it. Anyways, in order to glue the tail together, I needed to sand away all of the painting and priming in the spots where the tail needed to be glued. Contact cement won't get a good hold on areas that are painted and sealed this way, and it risks eventually peeling off and falling apart, so you need to sand it back down to the foam. I didn't glue things together first, before I painted it, because I figured that that would be more difficult and take more time to reach those tiny nooks and crannies between the feathers than it would to just add an extra step of sanding in. But if you would rather do it that way, you're totally free to.
I used hot glue to add extra security. I applied it around all of the edges of the feathers, but only on the inside or the underside of the tail, like the side that would be resting against me or wouldn't be seen when the tail was worn. After I glued all of the smaller feathers together, I glued down the 2 largest feathers next, or on top of those from like the back side, since we're working from the front backwards. The side that you see facing the camera is what is going to be the inside of the tail or the underside of the tail. After I glued down the 2 largest feathers, I then glued the 2 sets of the second largest feathers on top or behind that. Then I needed to sand away more paint from the very top for the next step, and I also did the same thing that I did with the smallest feathers, which was secure it all down with a lot of hot glue, which I lost footage of, but I was just adding some scrap fabric that matched the cape-like thing Meteion has in order to blend it in with the tail and make it look more like it's coming out of the costume. I also attached snaps that would attach to the belt and help keep this tail in place and hold it up. You'll see and hear more about this in the outro.
And that is it. After that, the feathers should be done. I just want to show you a slightly better view of the back and explain a little bit more of how I attach it. I will have a whole video on how I put together all of the pieces of my Meteion cosplay, but for now, as you can see here, there is 2 little strips of fabric that hang off here, both with a snap on either side, and these attach to either side of the belt, or either half of the belt on the back here. And then I have another piece of blue fabric that I have ruffled and glued into place here, and that is just to kind of hide this top section so that if it shows, you don't just see the top like straight cuts of the feather, and it kind of looks when you wear it like it's just a part of the cape. And I've tried it on and wore it. It does actually look like that, so that's really cool. I also have another little like flap of blue fabric that sticks out just a little bit here, and I put a safety pin on this and attach it to the rest of my costume, to like the cape and the dress, just for some added security. It helps like kind of hold up all the weight, so the weight's not being held up just by the belt alone or anything like that. And as you can see, there's still some yellow that shows. Luckily this doesn't show when being worn, so I'm not too worried about covering this up, but if this did show, you could just go back and cover it up, or you could just not Dremel away as much as I did. And then everything is super secured down with both contact cement and a ton of hot glue. But yeah, that's it. That's how I made the tail for my Meteion cosplay. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a lovely day, and bye!